Hey everyone, and welcome back to Sensory of Animal Assisted Services and Service Animals. I'm Ari, and I use she and they pronouns. Today we are going to have our first deep dive into looking at animal assisted services through sensory lenses. Today we will focus on an equine assisted services context. The icon at the top of this slide is a person on a horse. First, let's go through the 7 senses that we will be exploring in the context of equine assisted therapy. This slide has 7 yellow circles, each with a different icon inside. The icons are a blue eyeball, a black outline of an ear, a black outline of a nose, a mouth with pink lips and a red tongue, a black handprint, a black outline of a flexing bicep muscle, and a black outline of a person dancing. These icons represent the 7 senses that we consider when looking at an activity through a sensory lens. The senses are visual or seeing, auditory or hearing, olfactory or smelling, gustatory or tasting, tactile or touching, proprioception or pushing and pulling, and vestibular or moving. So, in an equine-assisted therapy context, what visual sensory experiences could someone experience, and in what ways might a therapist integrate these sensory experiences into an activity with a client? Here are some examples. A client could see horses of different colors, and the therapist could ask the client to match the horse's different colors to colored felt circles. A client could see different colored grooming brushes, and the therapist could ask the client to choose their favorite color and use that brush to groom the horse. A client could see sunlight or artificial light illuminating the riding arena, and the therapist could offer sunglasses to the client to decrease the brightness of the environment. A client could see horses eating foods of different colors and textures, and the therapist could ask the client to match the different foods with printed pictures of horse feed. There is a yellow square with an icon of a blue eye next to the text on this slide. Now let's talk about the auditory sensory experiences that someone might encounter when participating in equine-assisted therapy and ways in which a therapist might integrate these experiences into a session. A client could hear the sound of horses' hooves when the horses are walking or trotting. The therapist could ask the client to clap along with the hoofbeats. A client may hear one or more sounds that horses naturally make, such as whinnying, snorting, or stomping. A therapist could ask the client to mimic their favorite horse sound. A client may hear the sound of the arena sand crunching under their horse's hooves, or the sound of a horse drinking. The therapist could ask the client to indicate which sounds the client likes hearing and which sounds the client doesn't like to hear. A client may hear the sound of a hose filling a bucket with water. The therapist could make an activity in which the client fills different buckets with different levels of water and then tests out the difference in sounds when tapping on the different buckets. There is a yellow square with an icon of an ear next to the text on this slide. What about the gustatory and olfactory senses, or tasting and smelling? In an equine-assisted therapy context, a client may smell different foods that horses eat, such as hay and grain. The therapist could ask the client to indicate which smells the client likes and doesn't like. The client and therapist could also try tasting different foods that both horses and humans can eat, such as carrots, apples, or bananas. The client may smell the stable environment, including manure, wood shavings, and the leather of the horse's equipment. If one or more of these smells is disturbing or overwhelming to the client, the therapist could offer a nose clip or face mask. There is a yellow square with an icon of a nose and an icon of a mouth with its red tongue sticking out next to the text on this slide. Now let's consider the tactile or touch sensory experiences that a client might encounter in an equine-assisted therapy context. Through a variety of activities such as grooming a horse, feeding a horse, riding a horse, and moving through the stable and arena environments, a client can have a huge variety of tactile sensory experiences. For example, a client might touch the horse's coat and mane. They may touch the horse's different foods, grooming brushes, and equipment, and they may touch the sand or other ground material in the riding arena. When riding, the client may feel the riding helmet on their head and the saddle or pad under their pelvis and legs. There's a yellow square with an icon of a handprint next to the text on this slide. What proprioceptive sensory experiences might a client encounter in equine-assisted therapy? Remember, proprioception has to do with the sensory experience of pushing and pulling. Here are some proprioceptive sensory experiences a client may have while participating in equine-assisted therapy. Pushing a curry comb in circles and hard and soft brushes in lines while grooming a horse, pulling a comb or brush through a horse's mane and tail, pushing a wheelbarrow, and carrying a bucket. There's a yellow square with an icon of a red wheelbarrow next to the text on this slide. Next, let's consider what vestibular sensory experiences a client may encounter in equine-assisted therapy. A client may feel their body moving when riding a horse at the walk or trot, or when riding the horse up and down a ramp or mount. The therapist could ask the client to close their eyes to feel their movement and balance on a horse without visual input for balance. There is a yellow square with an icon of a person riding a horse next to the text on this slide. Please join us on August 23rd for Sensory of Service Dogs. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments section of this video.